Hello and welcome to CU Updates Lives, Lifting the Veil on the Association C-Suite interview process. I'm Brittany Carter with CEO Update. We're going to get through some quick introductions and jump right in as the room is filling up. Today, we are pleased to host this exceptional panel of experts that we have here with us. Our moderator, Fred Ferguson, newly named President and CEO of the American Bus Association, Julian Ha with Heidrick and Struggles, Lorraine Lavitt with Korn Ferry, and Stephanie Tomaso at Russell Reynolds. Before we begin, and while we have everybody here, I do want to highlight a couple of events that we have coming up in the future that we hope you'll join us for. If you are a first-time CEO who has been in the seat for 4 or fewer years, we hope you'll join us on February 26th in DC for a breakfast for first-time CEOs. And also the Salute to Association Excellence Awards Luncheon taking place on March 13th in Washington, D.C. It's a fabulous networking event, opportunity to see and celebrate your peers. We hope you'll join us there. There's a full list of all of the events that we have this year on CU Updates events page. We hope you'll join us at a future event. And if you are not yet a CU Update member, we would encourage you to join the community. I'm always happy to ask or answer questions that you might have, or you can learn more at cuupdate.com. And lastly, this call and this conversation is really meant to answer questions for you. So we want to encourage you to participate, to ask your questions. The panel wants to have an interactive experience. You can ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We ask that you do use the Q&A box rather than the chat box. And there is an option to ask your question anonymously. So if you're not comfortable asking it in the group, please feel free to do so anonymously. And again, we hope that you find this valuable. If there are sessions or other topics that you want to cover in the future, please let us know. We're here to build content and community for you. So I am now going to hand over the reins to our moderator, Fred Ferguson. And Fred, I'll let you take it away.
Hey, thank you, Brittany. Thank you to our panelists who are joining us. I've been in this role with the American Bus Association for about 6 months. Before that, I spent time as a Capitol Hill staffer, and then I worked as a corporate lobbyist, all in total for about 16 years. And I will start the panel discussion by saying 6 months ago, I had no idea who CEO Update was, and I didn't know any of the people on the screen right now. And so the fact that you're all here and participating, I think kind of shows you're ahead of the curve in that you understand some of the tools and resources that you have at your disposal as you're building and mapping out your own career journey. Because as I've learned about each of these three people, and as I've gotten to know Brittany and her organization, it's a wealth of knowledge and essentially a head start for anybody that's going through the C-suite or CEO recruiting process. So kudos to all of you for following along, for knowing what tools you have at your disposal. And then also, I encourage each of you to follow each of the firms that are represented and obviously each of these people because they're best in class when it comes to recruiting and placing leaders in the association space. So I really want to emphasize just how lucky you are to be here, to be following the content, and I encourage you to keep up. So I think as part of that, I think the first question that I'm going to throw out is, for me, I got on the radar for a CEO job because Julian reached out to me. And my first question, and this will go to everybody, but I'll go to Julian first. How do candidates like myself and others, how do we get on your radar?
Well, thank you for that question, Fred, and thank you, CO Update, for convening this, and thanks to everyone for joining. Look, Fred, it was a pleasure working with you, right? Because I think you understood the role that we played, the role that the clients, sort of interacting with. We got to you, I think, because of old-fashioned research and perhaps referral, and that is probably the most common way that candidates will get on the radars of Lorraine, Stephanie, and myself. When we conduct searches, we don't generally advertise them. We do it through a combination of a lot of stakeholder intake at the upfront to understand what the client is looking for. and then we work backwards from there. And then we source people that we know, that we trust to point us in the right direction. And that's probably how we got to you, Fred. Now you know.
Yeah. So Lorraine, maybe you could jump in, how do you develop a list? Research and referrals. What does research look like? Is it LinkedIn? Is it, op-eds? How are you finding names and building out your lists?
Sure. Well, it's a multi-pronged process. We're going to always get applicants, and there's some real stars in the applicant pool, but I'd say by far the pool are people who haven't applied necessarily when you look at the total group. Certainly, I would say I'd like to advise our listeners today to not wait until there's a specific search, because we're accumulating talent 365 days a year. We're always looking for great people who aren't on our radar. And even if we don't have an opportunity the day you reach out, we might have an opportunity in a month from now or 2 months from now. So I would encourage people to, as you think about what you're looking to do, get to know us in between. Send us an email with something that you're doing that's interesting. Don't just send us a resume and say, here. I have to tell you, we get resumes from people that just send us a resume with no context, what you're looking to do next, the kind of industries or functions you want to work in. So be thoughtful in terms of your communication, I think, to any one of us, where you're saying, I'm beginning to assess my career for the future. I'm looking for the following kind of roles. Attached, please find my current resume and maybe an example of something that you've written or done that would inspire us to think how interesting. And don't be put off if you don't get an informational interview. That's not always the case, just for timing, but start getting on our radar by being proactive and giving us some value in that sort of conversation. So Fred, I would just like to put that out there as an opportunity for people to be thoughtful.
Now, and Stephanie, I'll tee you up on a similar question. Now, each of you have a team of people behind you. So how important is it to identify you as some of the principals versus developing relationships with people on your team? Lorraine, I love that you gave the advice of proactively reach out. I can tell you, I don't think I've ever proactively reached out to a recruiter. So just hearing that type of advice, I think, is really valuable. I've been in the trap of applying to LinkedIn jobs, and you see people post about this, and then no one ever calls you back. So I think just the nugget you've given about being proactive is really valuable. But Stephanie, how do you kind of delineate direct contact with you versus your team? And how do you guys share notes behind the scenes?
Yeah, so, as I'm confident, Lorraine and Julian have, and folks at other firms have as well. So, we've got a database that we share and that our colleagues are able to access, sort of not only here in our office locally, but globally. And we're able to see that, Fred just started his job 6 months ago, and, he's not interested in a role right now. Otherwise, Julian will come and hunt me down.
We'll get to do another search, Stephanie.
Yeah, yeah, you could redo the search. But here's what the candidate is interested in, and this is what it looks like. So that when you do speak with one of my colleagues, we are sharing that information. We are often emailing that information, amongst the cohort of us that work on similar types of projects as well. And so that we can keep one another apprised, as well. We actually talk to each other, and every so often it's, hey, Lorraine, I met this person and I think that you ought to have them on your radar screen as well. Or if I'm speaking to a candidate, they'll say to me, who else should I know in the industry? And, I'll mention some of my colleagues that I respect that they ought to reach out to. And of course, my friends here are two whose names often roll off my tongue when that happens. I think that within my team, we've got folks who are more junior on our team who sometimes do conduct some of those sort of entry calls, and it's a great way for them to learn and get more engaged in the recruitment process and begin to flex their own muscles. And so they'll have some of those initial screening calls with folks who are, job seekers, if you will. And so they will do all the things that I just said, share the notes internally, put them in the database, et cetera.
One thing I've noticed in working now for an association, I came from a publicly traded, corporation, but the willingness to help each other out, whether you're competitors or not, is alive and well. And just hearing you talk about kind of giving referrals to other firms, kind of speaks to even the culture has trickled into, you know, the recruiting and talent acquisition side. So it's more of an observation, but it's been one of the more rewarding parts of working for an association is there is an intense competitive spirit, but we're also all in it together. And I feel that a lot more here than I did in my old job. So
Fred, could I
go
add
ahead.
something to Stephanie's point? Because I
Yeah.
think it was really spot on. One thing I just want to share for our listeners is that every colleague in our team really matters. And so sometimes people have an impression that they're not as important as talking to the principals who you might see here today. And I want to caution you, those people have a great deal of influence in our organizations, and take those opportunities. It is worth your time, not only because they might be working on a search you care about in the future, but that's our pipeline also for future partners, in our firms. And so these are really great colleagues, and they tend to give you a little more time, and they really do understand what we're looking for. So I just wanted to encourage people, Fred. Every opportunity, regardless of what someone's title is very valuable to you, and take those opportunities seriously.
So I'll add color to that. During our prep, I actually used the terminology. I think I was asking the question, when does the interview start? And is the call with someone lower on your team impactful? And every one of you kind of threw up a stop sign, and Julian, you had a really good answer, and maybe you could just kind of add some color to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, like to Lorraine's point, every interaction is an interview in a sense, right? There's a, we all take input from everybody that we're working with that are interacting with candidates. And so, there are many instances when a candidate, frankly, has not treated our assistant well or a colleague well, front office coordinator well. And that comes back to us, and that's just not going to not going to help that person's candidacy in any way. And we have excluded folks because of that, because how they treat people in different positions at different times is something that we need to evaluate and take into account. So treat every interaction as a important touch point, and good candidates will appreciate that.
When you're developing, when you're scoped for an open position, how many candidates are you looking to assemble at maybe that first stage? Is it a group of 10, group of 30? Maybe Stephanie, you could jump in to speak to that kind of first swoop. What are you looking at?
Yeah, it varies on every single search, and I would peel back the onion a little bit and add some transparency that on some searches it's only one, but to be in an ideal world, we're able to bring to our clients a group of 8 to 12 qualified, interested candidates that could do the job in some way, shape, or form. And then it's up to the client to decide who do they want to interview and spend time with, and determine how to move forward. So to get to that 8 to 12, we're probably interviewing an order of magnitude of about 30 or so folks. We're making many more calls than that, as Julian alluded to earlier. We're sourcing trusted colleagues. We're talking to folks that we've known for a long time to figure out who's the right person given this particular mandate that we're trying to solve for. We're assessing candidates against that position description and figuring out, which skills do they have, what do they not, to try to get to that point in time where we have what we feel is a strong slate. And some opportunities yield, and get more interest than others. But, in an ideal world, that's sort of what we're aiming for.
Lorraine,
If I
Julian.
could, I was just
Yeah,
going
go
to add
ahead.
a small point. I agree with everything Stephanie said, of course, is that, the funnel that we sometimes have to start with could be very, very broad and very wide. We've had searches where we've had to at least vet or review the backgrounds of, over 100, 150 candidates who, to start with, are within the range, right? They're all either association leaders or advocacy professionals or membership stakeholder experts. And there are certain cases when we even have to show the work, right? To show that we have boiled the ocean. This is the landscape, and that's why we're recommending that small slate of 5 or 6 or whatever number. How did we solve for that equation? Got to show that work. But yes, that is how we, sort of attenuate the funnel, starting with that very much longer list. And then, we interview the candidates, and in collaboration with our search committees, our clients, we arrive to a shorter list for them to have their initial first round meetings.
Yeah. I would just want to add a couple things, because I think we're all in agreement. And I want to go to Stephanie's point. It really depends, because there are some searches where it's a very focused group. It's that unicorn that we've been asked to find, and there might be 20 of them in America. Okay? And it's our job to see which of the 20 are willing to play in this particular opportunity, versus some searches where they really want to have a broad slate. They're not even, they want the best leaders in various profiles, so it really depends. And what I have found, and I'm sure my colleagues do the same, as we build relationships with colleagues in the association sector, and they learn to trust us when we say, this is not a fit. Believe us when we say that. It's not a personal thing. It's not something's wrong with you. It's that we heard something in the stakeholder intake or with our search committees where it's very clear there's certain qualifications or credentials that absolutely have to be embodied in that 8 to 12 people. Without that, do not bring them forward. And we'll get calls and contacted from people who aren't necessarily in our funnel because they aren't that unicorn or they don't fit that description. And we tell them, this is not going to happen. They still want to apply. It's not going to happen. And so I again want to encourage listeners today is that if one of us says that, it's because of the insights that we called from those meetings. And I have a lot of respect for association executives. Many of you don't know me before Korn Ferry out there. Been here only 21 years, but before that I had a whole career inside associations. I've led several of them. And I feel for you, okay? It's my point. I have been in CEO searches and just like you're looking to be over for years. I was on the other side. And nothing would irk me more than being part of a slate if I was not a serious candidate. Because you think of all the homework you do and the preparation that you put in, the energy that you put into this. What a waste of your time if you could have been told, look, you have to have this particular set of experiences. You don't have it. Maybe this isn't the one, but there will be, just not this one. So, Fred, I just wanted to encourage people, there's this funnel, but at the same time, as you get to know our teams and us, if we give you that message, there's a reason for it, and learn to trust a little, because we're thinking of you too. It's a two-sided street here.
So I want to get to a live question, but while we're on this topic, because this is my situation, I met Julian for a job that was unconnected to the American Bus Association. And Julian had the displeasure, or maybe pleasure, of calling me to tell me I didn't get the job. And, in hindsight, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because that was not a CEO position. And lo and behold, a few months later, this opportunity presented itself and Julian got to call me again. So maybe this isn't as much a question as it is reaffirming what you just said, which is if you go through a process and you're not successful, do not have sour grapes, and there's a learning in everything. And the way it's a sports analogy, but the way you manage yourself in defeat versus victory says as much about you as anything. And I know in my shoes, I must have done something right, because they called me back, and I'm now in this position. So that your story, Lorraine, was very
And
much
Fred,
personal to me.
I mean, I have to cut in. I said, that's exactly right. I mean, the way you handled and comported yourself, both in that first opportunity and how you accepted the news that you weren't going to be the right fit, left a fantastic impression in our minds. And that's why I called you for ABA. And, I would say that, yes, we certainly abide by what we hear from our clients, and we're not trying to, we're saying, look, yes, you told us to find us the purple unicorn, but here's a striped one, and we really feel strongly that you would benefit from meeting from this this type of unicorn as well. And we will advocate, right, when appropriate. And so again, to Lorraine's point, you have to trust us that we do have your interests at heart, because they would align. If they align with the clients, we will go to bat. And here we are.
So I'm going to play off this topic again, and Stephanie, this one will be for you. So with one of the jobs I interviewed for, the in-house executive team was a big part of the hiring process. For ABA, it was the board search committee that was the driver behind the process. Is that what's normal? Is it vary? What can candidates expect, and who's actually hiring them?
Oh, and I assume that the first job you mentioned was a CEO job as well.
It was not. It was a senior vice president of government relations.
Okay, got it. So, there was obviously a reason for my question. I think that it depends on the role, right? I mean, in a CEO level search, the board is the ultimate decider, and they are the ones who will make the hiring decision, and that's typically who we would be working with, and who the members of the search committee would be comprised of. That said, there are sometimes members of staff that serve on a CEO search committee. I personally would not advise that. I suspect my colleagues would say the same, because this is a search committee decision or board decision. But if it is a staff level role, then the CEO is the person that's making that hiring decision. And, at the end of the day, it is the CEO's decision on who should be hired, but it is not at all atypical for candidates to meet with other members of the executive team, individuals that might be peers, to not only get a sense of sort of the organization, the key issues, objectives that they might be working on, but also to sort of get a sense of, is this person going to gel properly with the team? Are we going to have an organ rejection situation, et cetera? So I think it sort of depends on the situation and the role that is being hired for.
Great. So I'm going to go to an audience question, and I'm going to talk about what I did, but then I'm curious how you guys would answer. But the question is, how much do you put into a resume versus a cover letter? Especially people with 20 plus years of experience, like how do you really distill all of that down, into those pieces of paper? And looking through kind of my interview process, one of the things that I leaned on pretty heavily was PowerPoint. And partly that's because I came from a corporate job where PowerPoint was king. But partly, in my old job, I managed 3 CEO transitions as head of communications. And one of them was outstanding. 2 of them were very average. And the one CEO that was outstanding, he had a really compelling deck that he presented to the board when he interviewed. And it was almost the same deck that he interviewed with was his 100-day plan. And so in part, that was my inspiration, was whatever I give to this committee that I'm interviewing with, I want it to be partly about me, but partly about my vision for the future. So whether that served me well or not, Julian, you can speak to it, but I know that's what I did. But maybe talk just about cover letters, resumes, PowerPoint, and just how people communicate themselves. And Lorraine, I'll start with you.
Sure. It depends on the audience. And that I want to break it into a couple pieces. When you initially apply, perhaps through us, the cover letter is very important. The cover letter is going to tell us whether they've taken the time to understand the organization and what is their motivation for wanting that role, what's the connection for them, and what competencies did they read from the position description that suggests they really saw what was essential for the role. So customize it. Unfortunately, a lot of people send us resumes with no cover letters. That's a very common thing. I don't know if my colleagues are experiencing that or not, but it's missing. Like that's like page 1 of your resume is missing when you don't do that. Think about that for a moment. All we know is what you did, but we have no idea how you interpret the role and what your connection is to that role, and why should we even interview you. So that's one thing I would like to impart to listeners is really give time to your cover letter. It matters. Our clients love them. I mean, actually, when they love to read that, and it also shows how you write and compose. With respect to the resume itself, plan on tweaking it depending on the role, because again, we often get resumes that are clearly for another job. The emphasis on it, it does not translate over. And the feeling is, well, this is my resume. I'm just sending it to 5 different jobs today, and hopefully one will stick. And I think none will stick. You're better off taking the time and focusing on your top 2 and having a really great resume that has a little bit of an edge. And where I'm going with that, sometimes people put accomplishments in there or emphasize certain competencies. If I could track the position description or the conversation that we took from the beginning to your cover letter and resume, the person gets it. They've given me evidence that there's someone I should at least call to see if there's more to learn about them. So that's just in terms of the entry point. In terms of the board, it's going to depend on the process. We all do a lot of things the same, but there could be nuances. If you're at the point where you've already gone through several steps in the process and now you're going to the board, they usually have some kind of an assignment, a presentation, perhaps it's an introduction. If it's an introduction, that's the time that I would say, Fred, having some type of a brief, very well constructed PowerPoint, not overly wordy, could be very powerful. Brief, because that's the concept.
Yeah, and that is when I inserted my PowerPoint. And honestly, the resume tip you just gave, I've never heard that. I've never used that. I've had kind of the same resume construct and just add on to it as things happen, but never have I tailored it to a position. So I wrote that one down. Stephanie, what about you?
I want to bring Lorraine's cover letter point to life with an example, if I could. So I did a search a handful of years ago for the Auto Care Association, which works with the automotive aftermarket on, getting their products to market. And there was a candidate that applied for the role. They were an unsuccessful candidate, but they made it very far. They did not come from sort of the manufacturing industry. They had no touch to the automotive industry. They were sort of an up-and-coming candidate, but who had a very strong experience in government affairs and in state government affairs, which was extremely important for this association at that moment in time. But they wrote a cover letter that was so compelling that, like, I still remember it 6 years later, about how when they were growing up, they used to remodel cars with their father and their grandfather. And it was just like this wonderful story. And then it talked a little bit about some of the experiences that they had in advocating for supply chain related issues in the industry that they were involved in, that again was not automotive related, that caused the search committee to look at it and say, this person is totally left field. But we are so compelled by what we see that we absolutely have to meet them. And they were a phenomenal communicator and they did a lot of the things that were necessary. And again, they weren't the successful candidate, but they got to the table when I think if just the resume had come in, it would have been like, well, how does this make sense? So, it just really helps to show you've got to sometimes do a little bit of extra work to bring your resume to life, bring your background to life and help to make the connection.
We're making it sound like you have to write a college essay application.
No.
But no, I think
2 paragraphs.
Right. And brevity is the soul of wit, and that is also important. I think absolutely, if you have the benefit of seeing the position spec as well, right? And then, highlighting things on your resume that map to what the position specification has outlined that we're looking for, I think that could be a useful exercise because, again, that position specification, if it's done properly, is a true distillation of all the things that we have spent time with the search committee, with stakeholders, with staff, and boiled it down into that document. So, I would just make sure that candidates take time to read that and to go through it and study it because what's in there, a lot of thought has, gone into that. And that is sort of the answer key, if you will.
Just to build on Julian's, if I may, that's such a huge point Julian brought up. It's not uncommon when people hear there's an opening and then there's an announcement, perhaps in CEO update that one of us has a search, all of a sudden we get a flood of resumes, but there's no job description yet because we just got it. And we're still going through this phase of an intake phase. And what we generally do is we of course respond to the person acknowledging that they've applied, but indicating that a position description will be available in X amount of time. We're going to send it to you, and then you have the opportunity to resubmit. Because I don't want to hold that against somebody that they're very proactive and out of the gate, but the reality is I want them to get a good shot at it. And that's even internal candidates. I will tell you, we've had internal candidates immediately send us, they heard that we want to search. And I will say to them, I'll tell you what, pause, because maybe they're not going to be hiring the exact same description as the incumbent. There may be an element of difference in terms of where they want to take the organization. And you've given us a resume for the status quo, not for where they're going. And so that's just another bit of advice, just because Julian's spot on there. You want to read that job description because there could be something different than was in place for a certain number of years.
So I'll give a tip I got from a mentor, and you guys can chime in and how you've seen this play out. But the first time I ever presented to the Vista Outdoor Board, which again, public company, we were at the time a $5 billion company. I was a junior lobbyist presenting, and the advice I got was just simply listen to the question and answer it. You know, especially me coming from a political background, and I'm probably doing it today, I can go off on tangents and filibuster, but the advice was stay focused on what they're asking you and answer it. And maybe speak to what you've seen in the interview room where maybe a rock star candidate droned on and missed the point and what that meant to their candidacy. Julian, you want to start?
You know, I mean, that's probably another question you were going to bring up in any case. You know, one of the fatal things that we've seen candidates do is when, let's say they're asked to give a brief introduction about their background, and it turns into a 15-20 minute monologue and recitation of their entire career. That is just, you know, that just kills it, because if they're not able to get across, to answer the question and get it across in a concise way, they've lost the audience. And so obviously we try not to let that happen too often, right? Because we will have vetted these candidates, we will screen them, but sometimes in the heat of the room and the, you know, as an opening question during the first round interview in person, candidates have been canceled because they just go on and on and on. They don't answer the question. They want to state what they want to state.
Stephanie, anything?
I think it's increasingly common as we see candidates do virtual interviews with our clients, because they're not getting the same degree of feedback that you do sometimes in person in a room. And so they want the nods and they want the, you know, oh yeah, whatever the case might be. And so that's where I sometimes feel the biggest amount of cringe and see the candidates going on in those instances. But it's hard to be the bystander too at times.
Absolutely. You know, I would just add to the really good comments so far, have respect for the group. If you're going to be the CEO of an association or you're sitting CEO and you're given 10 minutes on an agenda, you're not given 20. You're given 10 minutes on the agenda. So it's a skill set. They're assessing your ability to respond in a crisp, focused manner to their question. I think it goes back to what you said a moment ago, Fred. In every phase of that, they said, briefly take 5 minutes and tell us a bit about, you know, why you're interested in what uniquely qualifies you for the role. Take 5. Don't take 25. And I'll give you an example. I like what Stephanie did a little while ago, is bring it to life. I had a situation, this was in person. It was a former very prominent elected official, came in a room full of CEOs. They all flew into a particular destination because as an airport closed for their planes. So it was one of those. They only met with each candidate for 30 minutes. They didn't want an hour and a half. They gave 30 minutes. That's it. And then they were leaving. And this member of Congress got flown in, former, and that's all they were going to have was 30. At about 25 minutes, they were still talking about their intro. When 30 minutes hit, the CEOs looked at me. I was, let me just say, a little bit, nervous at that moment. And I said, so-and-so, thank you so much. Let me escort you out. They looked at me like I didn't have a question. I said, for 30 minutes. Thank you so much.
Wow.
And I had to debrief that person on why they didn't get any questions. It was
Wow.
over. It was over. And so I don't care how prominent you are. I don't care what you did. I don't care what big legislation you introduced. It doesn't matter. Respect the board. You work at the pleasure of a board when you transition from whatever role you're in into this one. And when they are clear on their time frame or what they want to cover, believe them. All right. And don't sort of show them that you could do it differently. That's not going to work for you. And I'm only using that example because that was such a high profile individual. Even someone like that was dismissed from the process because it was clear they were not ready to transition and be a servant leader and work at the pleasure of the board. It was all about them.
Wow. All right, so I'll give a softball before we get back into the substance. How did each of you get into recruiting? Julian, you go first.
Sure. I had a couple of different careers actually before getting into search 18 years ago. So I'm a corporate attorney by background, and I practiced in a number of different jurisdictions, the last one of which was in London. And then I left the law and embarked upon a series of startups, actually, still in the UK, in venture capital, financial services software, and investment banking. None of which, if on the face of it, would have made me think it would lead to executive recruiting. But when I was considering coming back to the States, I consulted with a number of mentors, and a few of them suggested executive search. Honestly, I had no clue what that meant. So I then did the usual and reached out and talked to people who were in that space. And I learned that it's a professional service, which is something I was used to. It's quite entrepreneurial, which is something I liked. And when I looked and reflected back on the 3 entrepreneurial startups that I was involved with, the difference that one succeeded, one didn't, was frankly the talent and the leadership and the culture of those organizations. So I thought, well, if I could translate some of that knowledge into a career where I could, help other organizations succeed by bringing the right talent, perhaps that could be satisfying. And that's what I've been doing.
All right, Stephanie?
So I had a shorter runway or on-ramp into recruiting. I spent a couple of years doing management consulting in my early career. And as a part of that, had the opportunity to sort of be the partner to our internal recruitment department in the form of this is what the job looks like, tag team for them as they were recruiting folks that were coming out of college and into the role, and found that I liked the recruitment aspect of when I got invited to participate in those interview days a lot more than I liked the management consulting part of my job. And so set about talking to friends and networking with others, as Julian suggested, who were in sort of that aspect of the professional services world, and was connected with some friends who were in the executive search space, and found my way into an entry-level role in the space, and kind of came up that research track that we were alluding to earlier of, really getting to learn the business from the ground floor, and have made a career from there.
Great. Lorraine?
Sure. Like Julian, I had a bit of a previous career, starting actually as a management consultant. I was in 2 firms. My background was in government contracting, and so had extensive work with the Navy, veterans, other DoD agencies and the like, with 2 prominent firms. And I was approached, and I said no a few times, but then I finally thought I was rude, to take a meeting with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They were looking for somebody with deep government contracting procurement background to run their procurement policy work in domestic policy. And let's just flash forward. I was there for almost 8 years under Dick Lesher was the president before Tom Donahue went there. And when I left, I was heading domestic policy. So, and I left to take on the CEO of the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, which is a very large chamber in the Washington area, to get sort of the state and regional experience at a time when the high tech industry was just starting up in that area. Need we say more? But it was really the early days. It was a phenomenal time, and then was recruited to be the first COO of the American Electronics Association when my former boss at the U.S. Chamber took over as their CEO, and I was there for 7 years. And I got a call from Korn Ferry. They decided to recruit me to come over and lead the practice because they were not looking for someone who came from a recruiting background. They wanted someone who understood associations intimately, and I was very fortunate to have that. I was not interested at first. It took a number of months for me to accept the invite, and I did. It's 21 years in January later. It's been a remarkable experience. And for the people who were questioning why I left the association arena to do that, I could say it was the best decision I ever made.
So somebody attended an event last May that CEO Update hosted. And during that event, there was a discussion about kind of the anticipated demand for CEO jobs in the association space. And this person's view is that the demand seems to have dried up over the last 6 months. And the question is, what does the outlook look like from your vantage points about openings, opportunities, and just maybe the C-suite health in general? So let's start again with you, Julian.
Sure. By the way, I just want to add, like, it's interesting to know that the three of us, we have been in this profession for what, collective, maybe almost 60 years, right? But it does say something, Fred, that, I think it's a real privilege. I know it sounds a little cheesy, but it's a real privilege to do what we do, to interact with the leaders that we get to day in, day out, both from the association community, but as well as the boards. And I think it certainly brings me real joy to be able to help identify a future leader for the right role, because that has huge impact on not only that person, but that association, that industry, the economy even broader. So it took me a number of other professions to realize that. And again, I just want to make a plug for our profession. What was your question again?
So demand for CEO
Demand.
jobs.
Sure. Look, I think there are a number of drivers, right? There are certainly some retirements that will be coming up. And again, you succeeded, Pete, who was in that role for what, 29 years, if I'm not
28
mistaken,
years.
28 years as CEO. And there are some other association leaders out there who are, approaching that time. Others may say, look, I've had some good runs. I'm tired. I want to do something else, right? That may cause a change. And there may be other situations where the board may say, we don't have the right leader or the CEO in place right now to lead us to that next phase that we want to be at. Or we may have some existential crises that are coming our way, and we need the right person to drive that. So I see quite a bit of activity, and I think that will continue. I don't know if that dry spell that person is pointing to is maybe just a blip or a certain time frame, but I think the state of this market will continue to be quite active. I'm curious to hear what my colleagues are seeing.
Stephanie, you want to jump in?
I think Julian has well stated sort of how I'm seeing the market as well. I haven't seen a material slowdown. It's also not atypical in my experience. I'd be interested in what Julian and Lorraine see as well. Like, oftentimes searches are not launching in the December, November, January timeframe. We tend to be sort of in a quieter phase at that point, where organizations are seeing that CEO X has told them at the fall board meeting that they intend to step down in the following year. And so then the cycle begins where they're beginning to start to try to have conversations with potential search firm partners at end of year, beginning of year, and then projects begin to launch in the first quarter, et cetera. So I think watch this space is maybe what I might suggest to some potential candidates as well.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you. I just would add, I've noticed there are also people just moving because they've been recruited. Sitting CEOs are being recruited elsewhere. So we're seeing some of that, not just new entrants and people who have not been CEOs, and that's just creating openings. And those tend to have a greater sense of urgency, regardless of what time of year, when you're losing a CEO and the new employer wants them as quickly as possible, even though they may have a contract clause that says 60 days, 90 days, they still want their mind share. They're still starting to send them materials and that sort of thing. So they want to get started and get finished quicker. So I know that's another dynamic I'm sure we're all seeing. And there are some sectors that I'm seeing just a lot of activity in particular, and that's the healthcare sector. It's large, lots of organizations, whether they're national or regional in scope, and so constantly seeing business in that particular market as well. So I don't know. I guess I'm not seeing any, from my perspective, a slowdown. It's just maybe as Stephanie said, some of it's just board dynamics and time of year when boards meet and know all that. But it's been pretty robust.
So Lorraine, I'll stay with you. How has the market changed since you all started? Meaning, are there new skill sets? Are there new personality traits, backgrounds that are in higher demand today, maybe than they were when you first started?
I do think so. I almost look at it like, like decades and changes. But one in particular, I'll highlight, more boards are saying, look, we're a nonprofit, but it's a tax status. We operate much more like a business, and we need to have a leader who understands that. We have income and we have expenses, and we don't like losses. we like to ideally put money away for other investments, because investments are essential, particularly in digital transformation. You got to have money to do those things, or to surge for a campaign. I need to hire consultants or whatever it is. So that's one thing. A business and financial mindset is coveted. I would say overall agility, somebody who's very nimble and able to deal with whether it's industry changes, economic, geopolitical, digital. I mean, we could all list the trends that we're all living, and it's affecting their industries, and they want to have not just affecting their associations, it's their industries or their professions, and they want to be sure they have people who get that. Another, I would say, is many of our clients that are professional societies have gone global or are tipping, kind of like stepping into that. Maybe they have one or two chapters, in Canada, maybe something in the UK, but they want to go full bore, and they need somebody who has a global mindset, who can help them chart a strategy so they don't waste money. A lot of people have wasted money over the years trying to figure out where did those millions go, and we don't see the ROI from it. So that global mindset, multicultural savvy. And then the one other piece that I know we're all hearing is digital transformation and AI. Every association's having this conversation. The person does not have to be a CIO. The person has to be savvy enough to know who to bring to the table, and open-minded to explore those trends and see how to advance their agenda through these means, whether it's customer experience, member experience, and productivity, accelerating their agendas in some ways. I think others are table stakes, communication skills, relationship building. Clearly, if it's an advocacy-focused organization, let me say from the time I started, and Julian, probably for you too, the world is very different in terms of politics. Need we say more? So I'm hearing people say we need to have somebody who's evergreen, don't hire for the current administration. And that was true of the last presidency. This does not point to the current president. Make sure it's somebody who can endure regardless of the political winds, because things are going to change every 2 years. And so just appreciate that. And the turnover in the agencies is constant. So because they constantly leave. So that's the other piece I would say, Fred, because, when I started, we actually had real bipartisan things happening. Shock. It was a different era.
Stephanie, anything you want to add?
No, I think Lorraine has really covered it. I mean, I think the other things that just I think stand out, it's like we see different kinds of candidates now too. I mean, and it's almost to Lorraine's point around bipartisanship, you know, I remember 25 years ago when we were doing this, it was find me a member of Congress. We don't hear many calls for a member of Congress anymore. So I think it's, you know, it's looking for candidates that can really accommodate the business needs, the needs of the membership, and understand intuitively what are the pressures that the members are facing on a day-to-day basis, and then be able to solve for the programs, the services, the advocacy that the members are going to need, and then inspire the team to be able to do that, particularly when you're thinking about so many of these organizations that are either fully remote or at a minimum partially remote.
I would just add one thing. I think, you know, in the years I've been doing this, I think the respect for good association leaders and what associations can do has grown from our clients. I think board members, CEOs recognize that running an association successfully is not like many other things. It is unique. And that's a unique skill set to be able to do that well. And therefore, we need to find people who have that track record or can show evidence of being good stakeholder managers, being the proverbial, you know, servant leader that is necessary to be successful in managing these dynamics. And as we've seen, Fred, you know, compensation has grown as a result to attract better and retain better leaders, because you don't have that third leg of the comp school, right? The comps, you know, stool. You don't have long-term incentive. You don't have equity, so you have to compensate for that with additional compensation to keep these people. But I think the respect for these roles has grown. As a result, you have better talent coming into these roles, and that's, I think, created a, you know, in a way, a nice flywheel.
So we're getting a lot of questions. So thank you everyone for submitting, and we are going to get to them. I'm going to take on two of these questions with kind of my own story, but then you guys can jump in. So one of the questions is, what kind of continuing education opportunities should people be considering? And then the second is, you know, to the VPs, how do you jump from the VP level to the CEO level? So, you know, I started as congressional intern, left as a chief of staff, and then went and was a corporate lobbyist. About 2 years into my corporate lobbying job, in one of my performance reviews, I had written down that I would be interested in taking on more responsibilities in the communications and ESG space. Sure enough, 2 or 3 months later, stock tanked, big layoff. My bosses said to me, "Hey, you expressed an interest in doing these things. You're now in charge." So at that point in my career, I no longer was just a lobbyist. I was also a communications and an ESG sustainability person. That was the biggest career change for me because it opened doors to be more than just a DC lobbyist. The second thing I did is being around the investor relations team, the ESG people. I was exposed that my financial acumen was lacking. So I went and got my MBA. And that was kind of the second leg that I think allowed me to stand out in this interview process to show that I wasn't just a one-trick pony. So from my own personal experience, taking on more responsibility in my job and pursuing that additional credential from an outside, you know, institution made a huge difference. So Stephanie, maybe you can just jump in with some advice as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to also sort of call out, Fred, your self-awareness in both of those instances, you know, I hope was also something that you maybe highlighted at the appropriate time with Julian and his team, and then in those interview processes, that, you know, it wasn't like these opportunities to tackle ESG or go get that MBA just sort of fell into your lap one day, but that you recognized that, you know, these were opportunities to make yourself more well-rounded. And so as I think about the folks that are listening in on our conversation today or subsequently on a recording, you know, being mindful of where are you trying to go and what might the gaps be that could preclude you from getting there is something that you need to be ever mindful of. And nobody's going to advocate better for you than you will. So thinking about how to fill in some of those holes is something that you need to be constantly thinking about, whether that's, expanding your skill set to include things that you don't have already, taking on a broader leadership role, sometimes leaving your organization to go get the chance to do something differently and then be able to come back into the organization at, a step or two higher. So I think that it's being thoughtful about what those changes might need to look like, is something that would certainly recommend for people to think about. Whether it's an advanced degree like an MBA, something that I've seen a lot of clients be impressed by, if not prioritize, is looking at ASAE certification. And, is this something that has someone become a fellow? Have they prioritized this as an association manager? It's been the differentiator between candidates in a couple of instances across my career when the search committees are looking at two different candidates and saying, this person's deeply committed to a career in association management versus candidate two who might not be. So that's going for that might be something to think about, and it shows the investment of time. So I think those are some of the things that you need to think about, but it's that self-awareness and the acknowledgement of I'm trying to grow and what do I need to do to get from point A to point F that I think is most important to keep in mind.
Lorraine, anything to add?
So well said, Stephanie. A technique that you might want to think about, particularly for people who are vice presidents looking to go to the CEO role, very practical. Pull some position descriptions that are on CEO update. Just pull them, look at them, do an honest, using Stephanie's technique of self-awareness, do an honest self-assessment of those skills, experiences, and say, interesting, there's a theme here. I don't have this, and it showed up in all 5 of the 5 I pulled. It sounds very simplistic, but it's meaningful, because what you're going to start to see is a pattern. And if you look across not just one specification, but multiples, you're going to start to see language, and you're going to see what they're looking for. So that's one way to start with a self-diagnostic. And I often see that people who are in functional leadership, whether it's advocacy or a COO of an organization or other functionals, a CIO, CFOs, and who aspire to that, they usually have very strong credentials in their specific area, but they don't have enterprise management. They haven't been on enough cross-functional activities. They may not have any external roles. An advocacy person does, but there are other functions that you don't have as much opportunity to public speak, be in front of the members. So once you take a look at those insights from the position descriptions, seek out opportunities either in your current organization, or I think to Stephanie's point, you might have to leave and go somewhere else to get those skills. If you're not quite ready to be the CEO, there might be another step in there, but look for those broader enterprise-wide opportunities so you're not pigeonholed, and also opportunities to be external with more public speaking and engagement, and maybe even participate in an ASAE committee to get a leadership role in another organization like that, so that you're showing your leadership abilities even on the outside of your organization. We look at all of that. All of those things are going to be good resume builders, Fred.
I think some excellent points have been made. I would just maybe add that, continuous learning is just that, right? Everyone can benefit from that, including CEOs, standing CEOs, because CEOs sometimes are looking for a larger role, right? And how do they keep advancing? Well, Stephanie's already mentioned ASAE, but another organization that maybe I'll make a plug for is NACD, right? And National Association of Corporate Directors. And you can become a certified director by going through some of their training. And that might be a useful perspective for CEOs or CEOs to be, to understand what the duties of a board director might be on the other side, right? So they can then do better stakeholder management and have a greater appreciation of what they're being sort of managed by or measured by. So, continuous learning at all levels, I would say, applies. And then, for someone maybe earlier in their career trying to get their first CEO position, um, you know, size and metrics do matter, right? And to Lorraine's excellent point, looking at what other searches, other clients, other organizations have looked for, and then seeing what gaps you might have and trying to figure out how to fill them is a fantastic strategy. And that may mean either going outside or even internally. If you can identify an opportunity and then go to your CEO and say, hey, look, this is something that's not being solved. I think I can solve it. Give me that chance, coach, put me in. You create your own opportunity to then say, I managed X budget, I managed X team, whether matrixed or direct. And that then sort of helps you get yourself on the ladder of getting more and more responsibility and more size and structure, which again are things that we do look for when we interview candidates for CEO positions.
So one tip I'll give to everybody, go to your Gmail and create a Google Sheet. So it's in the cloud, you own it. Don't do it from your work computer, and call it your accomplishment tracker. And literally everything that you do and accomplish, track it. Because throughout the week, you're going to achieve something that's significant, and 2 months from now, you'll forget about it. But if you write it down in real time, you're giving yourself kind of talking points and stories to tell when you're interviewing. I can tell you from the day I got at ABA, I have written down in my tracker 2024 revenue, 2024 marketplace, our trade show revenue, our social media followers, a lot of different metrics, so that 5 years from now, it's easy for me to say, here's the growth and the changes, hopefully, that, I was able to help steer. And I think I used to give that same advice to interns that we hired as a congressional chief of staff. And I think someone said earlier, you are your own best advocate, and that is 100% true. And if you don't take ownership of your stats, nobody else will. And they'll just kind of they'll get lost in the ether. So another question. There's somebody who works in-house at an association, and they're looking for advice on how do they jump to the top of the line for an opening at their association. Is that the best path to becoming a CEO, or is it looking outside, their walls to find that CEO job? What's it been in your experience? Julian, you want to start?
Sure. I think, it again, somewhat depends if it's an organization or a profession or industry where it's clear that it's a must-have for day one understanding of that industry or profession. Then that person who is currently in-house, I think, has an advantage to start with. But in certain situations, clients have said, look, we're open to folks from other backgrounds. Just, not to pick on you, Fred, but you didn't have necessarily a mobility background or a transportation background, or buses for that matter, but it was your ability to articulate a really strong vision, excellent PowerPoints, and just really, presented so well and communicated so well that they went outside the industry, right? And kudos to you. So it's sometimes folks who are in-house, will do well to focus on their industry because there may be organizations that they can get to the top of the line. But they should, if they're open to other industries and professions, they should think about the broader skills that they would bring to the table, right? The other agility, the other achievements that they can cite, that could they make them a really good candidate, as you were for ABA.
I think sometimes, not always, but sometimes the size and complexity of the organization can have a role to play in, how well prepared an internal candidate may have had the opportunity to become as well. In a smaller association, I think by nature, it can be a little bit harder for an internal candidate to have gained some of the experiences to make them well suited to step into the CEO role, because you don't have as many opportunities to lead when you've got maybe a 2 or 3 person staff, where, for example, in a huge $100 million association, and you're already leading a 50-person team, and lots of opportunities to present to the board or do whatever. And this is obviously a little bit of a generalized comment, but I think it gives one the opportunity to potentially have a little bit more external exposure, some of that management oversight, maybe a little bit of quote business exposure or financial exposure, etc. It is sometimes an instance where the board can have a little bit more comfort with that internal candidate. Longevity of how long that individual has been in the organization can sometimes play a factor in, again, the board's comfort with the internal candidate. If it's somebody that they've known for a really long time, they trust, they've seen them operate and play and know that they can be a little bit ambidextrous in terms of the types of skill sets that they have, and that they can operate outside of maybe the role that they play in the organization and step into the broader leadership role, that can often be a factor as well in my experience.
I apologize, Fred. When you said in-house, you meant the internal candidate?
Yeah, internal candidate.
Oh, I apologize. Sorry. I was thinking someone from that industry who was in-house in a private sector company looking to get into the association world.
Yeah, both good questions, honestly.
Well, then I would just supplement my earlier answer. I would just say that, look, I think it's almost in every case, every search I've done in the last few years, there is an internal candidate. And I think that speaks well to the governance of that organization in terms of talent planning and having someone, to step in if the CEO hits the lottery, right? And to be able to slot in. I would say internal candidates, there are a lot of considerations. There's more expected of them, frankly, right? When they come to the table and interview for the role, I tell them, you know more about the association than I even do. And I think when you're presenting, you should come with your vision, talk about the things that you could have done or would have done or will do if you were in the position to lead the organization. So the expectations are much higher, but I think the internal candidate also should have some advantages going into that process.
And just to build on that, and they should, but sometimes they don't, as we all have seen, right? We've all seen this happen where, otherwise really strong, talented people get in the room and they're more status quo in terms of what they're speaking to. It's sort of their current playbook. Some are hesitant to, frankly, say anything that could be perceived to be negative of somebody who's leaving. And I think you have to get that out of your head. You're not saying something negative. No one wants negative. It's more about future vision, as I think Julian used that term. I think it's the right one. Perhaps under the incumbent's leadership, they were the right person at the right time. And now we're dealing with a completely different world. And they're looking for someone who can navigate and lead for the next 10 years, not the last 10 years. And they need evidence that that's you. And oftentimes the reason they go outside is because they believe, based on the performance of the candidates, that someone on the outside has a fresh look, can bring a fresh pair of eyes and see things that someone on the inside who's been there a while just doesn't see anymore. It's become sort of the way of doing business. It doesn't need to be that way, because we have placed many internal candidates, but just keep that in mind if you're put in a position as an internal candidate. Don't be afraid to depart from the status quo. They're expecting it. Your competition doesn't know the status quo. So there you have the benefit of coming in with a completely open mindset, and they actually have a little bit more latitude because everyone knows they don't know as much as an internal. So keep that in mind. But I wanted to also express another trend that I've seen of people who leave, go out, do something different to broaden their skills, and then they become a candidate in their last organization for CEO, and they get it. So I just wanted to, also put that out there as, because we haven't talked about that. Sometimes you have to leave to get the CEO role in the future, and build different competencies, and then come back in a process when the opening comes about, as a fresh pair of eyes and candidate, but you do know enough. You know enough that's helpful, but you're still coming in with a fresh pair of eyes. It's like a blend. So that's another one, Fred. I just want to throw
Yeah.
out another trend.
So another question from the audience is, they're expressing that it's really challenging to show your experience and connect it back to the job description. So I'll tell a story with Julian. So at ABA, 65% of our revenue comes from our trade show. And that's way out of balance. And that's a different story, but we're way dependent on our trade show. But so the search committee, they needed to find a candidate that could perform and execute the trade show because it's the most important thing that we do. And so this is kind of the special relationship you can have with the recruiter who you all work for the company. You don't work for us. But if you have the right relationship, Julian came back to me and said, okay, you have a hole as it relates to trade shows. Can you send us a one-pager on your trade show experience, philosophy, and why we should pitch you as being capable of managing the trade show? So I was able to basically submit a supplemental cover letter or resume that spoke to the trade show experience that I had, which was actually probably more than people thought. And I think that was probably one of the most eye-opening parts of the process for me, where, Julian truly felt like a guide, not just the mouthpiece for the search committee. So Julian, I don't know if you remember that, but that
I
was,
do.
that was a really cool part.
No, and look, this is where, I really felt strongly that you were a very good candidate for this role and that ABA would appreciate that. And I didn't want that one thing to derail you, right? And I wanted to at least give you the opportunity to highlight, experience in that world or analogous experience. And again, all on you, Fred, right? You were able to do it. And I think your presentation and then subsequent sort of follow-ups were spot on, which is why, again, you're here.
So I like this question. So how do I jump from my $10 million association to the $200 million association? Stephanie, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think it's particularly attractive if you're the CEO of the $10 million association and you're looking to go to the $200 million association, because I think in many ways that individual has shown the fundamental skill sets that might be necessary for success in the larger organization around stakeholder engagement, board management, budget management, people management, the agility that Lorraine alluded to earlier in terms of being able to navigate the variety of complexities in the external market, whether it's adapting to AI and other disruption from technology or policy as it's moving on a day-to-day or hour-to-hour basis, et cetera. And it may be important or not, depending upon the organization. Do you have experience with the issue set that is similar from the $10 million organization to the $200 million organization? I think that can be a critical question in the eyes of the board, that they often might have. A big piece of the pie that we've encountered sometimes is, what are the internal political complexities, both people, board, stakeholder engagement that may be at play in that $200 million organization that the candidate could be stepping into, that could be the issue around potentially making that transition. That can often be the stumbling block around the perception of the hiring group as to whether the candidate is going to be able to make that move. Do they have the political sensitivity, and I mean that in a small p political, the stakeholder engagement, the ability to navigate, what might be challenging about the $200 million larger organization as opposed to wherever it is that they might be today. But assuming it's a CEO to CEO transition, you've done the job before, which presumably makes you better situated than the person who's the head of membership or head of advocacy in another $200 million organization.
So I'm going to just kind of give last call for questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to leave some time for wrap up. And maybe for the panel, I'll just kind of throw some rapid fire to one of you. And if someone's got a really good answer, obviously jump in. But Lorraine, I'll start with you. You know, what are the tips for the Zoom interview? How do you nail it?
Yeah. Listen to us when we prepare you, because we all do before you go in. We'll give you a sense of who's going to be there. Make sure you've done your homework. When we talked about time management before, when you're asked that opening question and you're told take about 5 minutes, take 5 minutes. At the end of that Zoom interview, pretend you are in a room with people. Don't just say, good to see you, and hang up. It's happened many times. Pretend you're in a room and you're about to shake someone's hand, but you can't. Do a virtual handshake. Have something that you're going to say. They want to know. They want to know, do you actually want this job? There's no body language. There's no way they're going to be able to read you. If you were walking out of our conference room, you would walk around, you'd shake hands, you'd thank them. Have something to say. If you're feeling it and you want that job, be prepared to say in 30 seconds why. You want it and why.
You got to ask for their vote.
Ask for their vote.
So Julian, have you seen state association leaders successfully jump to national associations, and how do they do it?
Actually, I haven't. I haven't seen that often. Maybe my colleagues have. Because I mean, there are a few industries where the state level is where it's happening, right? Insurance, healthcare, a few other areas. But many of our association searches here in DC tend to be more federally led. But again, there are some exceptions, and if those industries line up with the state level association experience that those people bring, then that's when the magic can happen. But personally, I haven't seen it that often.
So this is, I think we've covered a lot of this. This maybe is the whole kind of title of the panel, but you know, the person's asking, how do you identify, you know, the it factor, you know, that CEO material versus you would make a great senior staffer? How do you kind of begin to separate yourself as having that CEO presence? And I think this one's probably good for everyone to answer. So Stephanie, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of the it factor is understanding the strategy and the vision and where is the organization looking to go. Where I tend to see search committees view a candidate as sort of too operational, too staff-like, is when they fail to translate the what's happening today to where are we going and how do we solve for that. So I think it's being able to come in and give confidence that you would be able to articulate a vision, execute the vision, and pivot as needed, and demonstrate examples of where you've done that in the past. And I want to allow the other, you know, Lorraine and Julian to chime in, but I also want to quickly give some confidence to our state association listeners out there that I have had some really strong state association candidates who, you know, one in which was the finalist candidate for a job and ultimately declined the offer, with much to my chagrin, because he couldn't relocate his family in that instance. So it does happen.
You know, on the it factor, I'll just throw in something, because you were starting to say it's executive presence. Is it? It's sort of how one carries themselves. It's their communications. It's how they engage the people in the room. And we've all been there. I know Julie, Stephanie, and I sit in on these interviews and we watch. I call it the magic happens, and you could just see it happening. It unfolds before your eyes, because there are people who are very gifted at drawing people in. They're very good at storytelling very crisply and then bringing people in so that it shows they're relatable and people understand it. And that's something it's hard to put in a box. It's not a bullet point. It's just what it is. So I would say for our listeners is, don't take for granted your communication skills. A lot of people go and get coaching there. They need it for media. That's common. You know, PR media, many of us have been trained to do that, but it doesn't hurt if you're feeling that that's not your greatest strength. That's something that we talked about, continuous learning earlier, but that's a skill that you could work on with a coach. And I've just seen people who are, and sometimes a little less qualified in the credentials, But because they can do that, people feel like, you know what? Our audience on the Hill, the regulators, our members, they'll listen to them because there's just a way about them that they have to draw us in.
I would just add that again, I think, on the whole, association leaders, yes, they do have to have a, common set of abilities to communicate effectively, to have a certain amount of charisma, to draw people in, to tell the stories, as Lorraine was alluding to. But sometimes, there are many different types of leadership, right? And sometimes a leader who's perhaps a little bit more introverted might not be the wrong type of leader. In fact, it might be the right leader. And so, as I'm sure my colleagues also have available to them, we apply a proprietary assessment tool that helps sort folks into different types of leadership styles. And again, truly no right or wrong answer, but it does give a readout on how that person presents him or herself, right? Whether they're a collaborator, a harmonizer, a pilot, and there's sort of different underlying, sort of descriptions of each of those monikers. And that's, again, a useful data point to supplement some of the art of search with a little bit more science. And so we try to balance that so that we have more information to say, okay, for your organization, maybe this mix of a leadership style is actually the right one. Not the shiny object isn't always the right answer. And we try to counsel our clients not to get too drawn into that, because we've seen situations where that's not worked out well.
So I've got one just very technical question left from the group, and it's, where else should people go to find openings? CEO Update has a job board. How do people stay connected with what's out there? Julian, you go first.
I mean, look, as much as I like to think all searches come to one of us, sometimes searches get done internally, right? They don't go to external search. And so if you're already in an organization where someday you'd like to be the leader, I think you can start your internal advocacy campaign and try to position yourself for that role. Now, on the other hand, if there is a search that does happen, I think internal candidates should take some comfort in that, because if they go through the process and they prevail, it just means that they've been validated even more strongly. But having said that, to look for other opportunities is, again, use your mentor network, because they may tip you off and saying, well, my friend so-and-so who's running this other association may be retiring in the next year, right? So that's a place that you might want to start to get to learn their issues a bit more, or position yourself as a thought leader vis-a-vis that organization, so that if and when there is a search, Lorraine, Stephanie, or I, depending who's handling the search, will give them a call and give them a good hearing, if you will.
Fred, I think another thing to keep in mind is the relationship that you and Julian had. It's not only a relationship that extends between individuals in the market and recruiters. It's who's your network broadly. And thinking about folks that peers, friends, colleagues, folks that at other associations. It's not to suggest that you want everybody to know that you're open to hearing about other roles, but I'm sure that all of us have had people send job opportunities, over time, like, hey, did you know that XYZ organization is thinking about hiring for a new head of communications, CEO, head of government affairs, etc. Like, this is a small town. This is a small community. I should be mindful of the fact that we're not only talking to folks in Washington right now. Things get out into the network and people talk. So talking to your colleagues, talking to your friends that you trust, and being able to communicate with one another that I'm receptive to hearing about things, and also making thoughtful referrals when folks like Lorraine and Julian and I call you to say you ought to consider XYZ person. keeps people in the network. And that's oftentimes how these types of opportunities get on different folks' respective radar screens. So I think just, being thoughtful about that kind of, proactive networking, coffee dates, et cetera, is something that can be really helpful.
And I'm just gonna put a plug in for CEO update. I have to say, for the CEO roles, by far, this is the place to be. If you're looking to, if you aspire to be a CEO, if you're sitting CEO, you got to subscribe. I mean, this is where, they are very gracious to all of us. We are in contact with each other about these roles. And to your point, Fred, even when people aren't using a search firm, they will often seek to post the opportunity at CEO update. So, it's worth the investment.
Well, we've got 5 minutes left, so I just want to thank all of you for your time and energy. And honestly, I kind of took a full list of notes for myself. Brittany, I'll let you maybe close it out, and just really want to thank you for convening us and allowing us to be here and to participate.
Thank you again. That was great and very helpful. And thank you to the audience for asking so many great questions. I'm sure we have a lot of content to think through for future sessions. I did drop in the chat. I know there was a lot of questions about internal hire, external hire, where that's all coming from. We released a report at the end of last year on hiring, CEO hiring trends that CEO Update covered. So that's a free report. I just put it in the chat. We will be releasing to CEO Update premium subscribers a deeper dive of that same report, breaking it down by org type, revenue size, all of that should be out in the coming weeks. Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you, Lorraine, for that very nice shout out. We really do work very closely with all of the search firms in the market, as well as individual orgs, to try to cover as many CEO positions as possible. But I want to echo what Julian and Stephanie also said about networking. The amount of times we hear about things before they're happening. And so building out that networking, attending events is always a great thing to do. So thank you again. For those of you that are in Washington, it seems that we've avoided the snow if you have a commute home. So have a wonderful rest of the week, and we hope to see you at an upcoming event.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.